All right, thank you all so much for coming tonight. We're very excited to have Dr. Jackie Gilson here with us. She's a fellow Bell parent and a school psychologist over at Lane and DeVry University, and she's going to talk to us tonight about anxiety and how that can be present, especially for adolescents, early adolescents, and even as early as upper elementary grade students. If you are interested, we are also going to do a follow-up to this evening. Tonight's more informational about what is anxiety, signs and symptoms you can be looking for, and language you can start using at home, tools you can start using at home with your children. And then as a follow-up on February 11th, as part of the parent forum that's going to precede the LSC meeting on February 11th, we're going to talk about some of the things that we've rolled out as a school to help alleviate some of that anxiety that can be present in our students, and some of the strategies that we're using at Bell. So please be aware of that, mark your calendars. Also, if you could, after tonight's presentation and you realize how amazing it was and how helpful it was, please spread the word, because we are recording it, and we're gonna make this recording available on our website as a podcast for parents who weren't able to make it in person tonight. So please help us spread that word so that as many people as possible can benefit from tonight's presentation. And with that said, I'll turn it over to Jackie. Thank you.
Hi everyone. Can you hear me okay? Great. So it's such a pleasure and such an honor to be invited to come here tonight. This is a subject that I've become more and more knowledgeable about simply because it's more and more relevant every year that I've been working, and especially in the environments where my children are going to school and where I work every day. So, and I imagine everyone is here tonight because they've seen the same thing. It just seems like a very different tone than when we were growing up. The expectations are very different. The desire to get children to specialize or to become perfect is more and more common. And I actually don't use the word perfect in my vocabulary. Humans aren't supposed to be perfect, so I think it's very unnatural to use the word perfect when you're talking about human beings. And we'll talk about that a little bit as I go over strategies. So what I'm going to do today is share a presentation that I think I share in some form or another with students every day in my work at Lane and at DeVry. I've given this presentation here at Bell to the 7th and 8th grade students last year. I give this presentation to the 11th grade classes at DeVry every year, and I'm actually presenting it to the staff at Lane in 2 weeks for our professional development day. Because it really does apply not just to adolescents or to children or to parents, but all people. And the purpose here is to helpfully make you more knowledgeable, more thoughtful about the things that we do every day that are very automatic. I like to give an example of toothbrushing. When you were 2 or 3 years old and you were learning how to brush your teeth, at the time you were probably using a tremendous amount of brain capacity to do it. How much paste do I put on the brush? How do I brush teeth I can't see? How do I make sure I don't spit it out, swallow it? How do I make sure I spit it out? So I'm sure most of you, if not all of you, brushed your teeth today, but you probably don't remember very much from the experience. And that's because our brains are built to do things automatically, and that's a good thing, because if we had to be that conscious in everything that we did, we wouldn't be able to get out of bed in the morning, right? We'd be so overwhelmed. So I think anxiety, stress is something that if we become a little bit more aware of, less 40-year-old toothbrushing and more 3-year-old toothbrushing, then we could become more conscious not just of ourselves and our own physical responses, but also of the messages that we're giving our children and our neighbors and people in our community. Any questions before I get started? Okay, if you guys could keep your questions for the end of the presentation, because I'll probably get into a rhythm here. So if you guys can remember your questions. All right. So I think it's really important. Is this loud enough and everyone can hear me okay? Okay, good. I I sound kind of NPR. I didn't don't I? Right? I'm really not NPR. All right, so what's really interesting first is that we can hopefully get to a common ground about what stress is. When I ask students, is stress good, is stress bad? I mean, generally people see red. They just think it's something bad, it's something wrong. I don't want to be stressed. Well, actually, there are two kinds of stress. There's eustress, which is good stress, and then there's distress. And we all know what distress is, right? So what is good stress? How can stress be good? Well, actually, that feeling that you feel before a race, or before a party, or before a vacation, that's good stress. And in our bodies, it doesn't particularly matter if it's the stress you feel before a high-stakes exam or before a dance. To your body, it's still either that feeling in your head that's all confuddled, or that feeling in the pit of your stomach, or it could be your breathing or your perspiration. But stress is stress, and there's good stress and there's bad stress. In fact, it's a normal human response. I would actually tell students that you should never aim to have no stress, because without any stress, I say that's kind of like Jell-O. You'd have no alertness around you. I wouldn't trust you to cross Western Avenue safely if you were Jell-O, right? So at the very least, always think about yourself as having some alertness, some stress. So to have no stress should not be a goal, and it shouldn't be a message that should be conveyed to people in general, children in particular. So stress is important. Stress helps you succeed, and I always give the example of studies that show, and you could probably give anecdotal examples from your own life, that you could probably think of times you had a performance or a presentation and you were a little anxious about it or nervous, and you actually did better. And actually right now my anxiety is a little high. And I'm kind of surprised as I'm talking to you that the words are kind of coming out of my mouth. Because in the moment you don't know, but then you just sort of have that extra bit of energy that kind of pushes you over and helps you. And I'm seeing some nodding faces, so I can imagine that many of you can relate to that. So if someone ever says, the message of this slide is, if someone says, I don't want to feel any stress, I feel stress. Well, stress is good, it's important, and it helps us. And here's the last point. Mental health is a continuum. I hope that people don't think that the purpose of psychological science, counseling, human development, to be a quality person is to just be happy all the time. That is not the measure of mental health. The measure of mental health is that you can feel every emotion, but that you're integrated, meaning that sometimes you feel sadness, sometimes you feel happiness, sometimes you feel excitement, and that's all fine and good, but you're basically the same person in every sort of context. And mental health is a continuum, also meaning that keep in mind that most of the time when we're dealt with stressors, we can deal with it ourselves, or we can talk to a family member. Maybe it rises to a level where you need to talk to a counselor, or you need to speak with a counselor in the community for a period of time. And for some people, about 1% of the population, it reaches a point where you might require some inpatient support. But the point is that it's a continuum, and we all move back and forth. We all have those perfect storms where we are overwhelmed. And the point is that it is all very natural and normal. Okay, so what's really helpful is if you can talk to yourself or with your child about stress being in a yardstick. So if we know that stress is okay and it is normal, what we need to do is sort of kind of have in our minds what is acceptable for you. So we already know that 0 is not okay. It's never okay to have no stress. That's Jell-O and being dangerous on Western Avenue, right? And 10, I like to describe to students as a panic episode, a panic attack. I don't even like to call it panic attack because the word attack is very anxiety-provoking. So I use the term panic episode. And when you ask teens who have had this experience what it feels like, they all uniformly tell me the same thing. They say, I felt like I was going to die. They all describe it that way. And what I always tell students when they say that they've had that experience, and statistically it's about 15 to 20% of all teens, is it never lasts more than 20 minutes. Never, 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 never. And when you're in it, you feel like it's never going to end. But it never lasts longer than 20 minutes. Your human body couldn't maintain it, that intensity for that long. So to keep that in mind, it gives it at least some shape, some parameters. And with that in mind, then you think, well, maybe there's some strategies I could use so that it doesn't have to go that far, it doesn't have to go on that trajectory. But with the yardstick, anything between 1 and 9 is fine. If you come from the kind of house where there is incense and spa background music, maybe your normal is 2 to 4, that's fine. Or maybe you come from a neurotic New York City household, and maybe your normal is 6 to 8, and that's fine. And I would even say that if it's a day that you have a presentation or a performance or an exam, even something higher is normal and to be expected. And that way, when students come back to see me, I can say, well, where are you on your yardstick? I'm a 7. Okay, you're a 7, so is that acceptable to you? Yeah, it's the upper end, but yeah, that's acceptable to me. So it doesn't make it so amorphous and so frightening. You're feeling stress, which is normal, and it's within a range that's acceptable. So you can see how that gives you some sense of control. And control is actually a really important theme that we'll talk about in just a moment. Okay, so we're going to talk a little bit about cognitive distortions. Whenever I encounter someone with very high levels of anxiety, unbearable levels of stress, it's usually almost always because there's a cognitive distortion going on. A cognitive distortion is when your thinking is not accurate, it's not correct. So, for example, I can't have any stress, I can't have any stress. Well, you're a human being, you're going to have stress. That's a distortion, right? How can I be feeling stress, but I can't have any, but I'm a human being? How can I be perfect when I can't be perfect because I'm a human being? These are distortions. And the human reaction is that generalized anxiety. So these are a few guidelines, and then we'll go a little bit deeper in a moment. I'm freaking out. So I say that, it seems like you'll hear adults, you'll hear children say, I'm freaking out, I'm freaking out. Are you freaking out? I'm freaking out. What happens when you hear the phrase, I'm freaking out? What happens? You freak out. Exactly. Language is very prescriptive. Language is very powerful. There's a field of science called linguistics that's all about how powerful language is and how it informs us. So instead of saying I'm freaking out, what do you do with that? So I'm freaking out? What does that mean? Instead say, I'm feeling some stress here. I'm feeling like this is making me really uncomfortable. Call it for what it is. And similarly, if your kids are around other kids that are saying, I'm freaking out, talk to them. Is that helpful? So when you're all freaking out, what happens? What do you do with that? And similarly, just be aware of the language you're using at home. Are you talking about freaking out? Are you talking about, I'm going to fail, I'm going to fail, I'm going to fail? What do you do with that? Is that helpful? No, not helpful. And then stay away from the drama and relationships. I come from a position where I'll say to students when I'm evaluating them or talking to them, counseling them, I'll ask them, are your friends drama-filled? Is there a lot of drama there, or are they pretty supportive? And when I draw that dichotomy, people are like, oh, so if there's a lot of drama in my friendships, then I guess they're not supportive. Well, no, because if your friends are chasing down the drama, it's exhausting. How can you get your proper sleep and eat a proper meal and, be able to attend to all the things you need to attend to if you're focused on drama that doesn't really go anywhere? So, just some pointers, but this is the good stuff. So what I do when I work with students who experience stress, high stress, anxiety, symptoms of depression, what we do is we go over this list of cognitive distortions, and I always say that we all do this. Everyone has them. I was with a student last week who denied every single one, and then as I was getting to talk to him, I'm like, oh, so it sounds like this might be. And it's really important, too, to understand that we all do this. Ms. Kalana does this, Ms. Miller does this, everyone does it, and the important thing, the power, is when you recognize when you're doing it, to catch yourself, to become aware of it, to be aware of brushing your teeth when you're years old, right? So to raise your consciousness. So here are the examples. Polarized thinking. If you find yourself saying, this always happens to me, you never listen, this can't ever be. You know, very infrequently in life do we have those polarized moments. I can't think of very many. More often it's, you know, some shade of gray in the middle. So if you're more careful with your language, say things like, you know, it seems like more often than not you are, you know, because when you say this never, this always, this can't, what it does is it puts a person on the defense. Just something to be aware of. And I see people giggling, like, wow, I do that. It's okay, we all do many of these. The important thing is to become aware of them. Tunnel vision, seeing only what fits. So if a student were to say, Miss Karana hates me, well, didn't she stay late after school and help you with that? Yeah, but besides that, she totally hates me, right? So that's an example of tunnel vision. And you can see how that could distort your view because you just want to see one thing and you push away other points of view that could be helpful. Overgeneralization. I got a D on a quiz and I'm going to fail. I'm going to fail, I'm going to fail, I'm going to fail. Well, first of all, mathematically, if you get a D on a quiz, you can't fail, right? Because D is not a failing grade. But beyond that, you know, it's helpful, especially with teens, you can explain that every single piece of data kind of washes out the effects of any one. And by the end of a marking period or a semester or a school year, the grade you get is an aggregate of many, 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 many data points. And instead of looking at a D as, I'm going to fail, I'm going to fail, think, well, you know, let's go look at some of the errors we made when you're ready, and that way you don't have to make that mistake again, right? 2 points. I remember my first year at Lane, I was working with a sophomore who was doing very poorly on her chemistry quizzes. And she used to stuff them in her backpack and she wouldn't look at them, you know, because it's so psychologically uncomfortable to look at low grades, right? So when she came to see me, I said, you know, let's start looking at these. Well, it turns out that every single quiz that she got in chemistry, the teacher wrote the same thing, no naked numbers. You know what naked numbers are? It's when you write the mathematical answer, but you don't put grams, ounces, right? Pounds, whatever it is. So if she had just looked at one of those papers, she would have known, but it's very hard for teens especially because they're so egocentric. They just don't want to see something that they've done wrong, right? But, you know, and maybe as a parent, you're not the right person to have that conversation with your teen, but it's something that maybe a trusted counselor could help negotiate that conversation. Another point, and this is a side one, when it comes to overgeneralizing, perfectionism plays into this too. I don't remember an A- I got in an earth science quiz when I was in the 7th grade. I'm sure I probably got an A- at some point. I don't remember it, but the things I do remember are the times when I've been compromised, challenged, disenfranchised, pushed up against the wall, and then you learn, you know, what you're capable of, and that's the good stuff. It doesn't necessarily have to be, you know, rainbows and cherries and butterflies, right? Because that's not even the good stuff. It's not even the stuff that you learn from, right? So, I was off track a little bit, but I think good message just the same. Arbitrary inference is a conclusion contrary to data. So if a student at Lane were to say to me, I can't test well, I can't test, I'm horrible at testing, I'd say that's arbitrary inference because to earn your spot here, you had to have done very well on tests for a very long period of time. So there's really no data to support that. I had a student tell me yesterday, I don't have anyone who cares about me. And so then we sat down and we talked about, you know, who are the people in your life who has the strongest influence on you, who are the people who have your back. And then, you know, she was able to appreciate the fact that maybe that wasn't accurate, that she does have people in her world that care about her. So arbitrary inference, don't accept it on face value. Perfectionism, this is a huge one, and it's also one that I really enjoy talking to students who are suffering from this, particularly when I show them this little diorama with my hand. Okay, so let's say this is perfect, and I don't know what this is, because it's not human, right? We talked about that in the beginning, because humans aren't perfect. But let's say this is you and your efforts, and maybe some of the time you achieve perfect, whatever that is, right? but more often because you're a human being, you don't achieve it. And even when you do achieve whatever that is, all you get for it is the urgency of like, okay, now I gotta do it again. And I gotta do it again. And I gotta be perfect again. And then that. But you never have the opportunity, you never have the benefit of rising on top of it and realizing, I got on top of this. I had my standard, my expectation, and I exceeded it. And let me like pat myself on the back. I met with a student yesterday who applied to 21 colleges, and she got into 14, and she hasn't heard from the other 7, and she's like, you know, I've got to find out it, and how do I do it? And it's like, you know, when are you gonna, you know, treat yourself, congratulate yourself, enjoy your life, take stock in all that you have accomplished and all the gifts that you have. And if you're chasing down perfectionism, you are never, ever, ever going to have that opportunity. And I know that's a polarized thing to say, but it's true. Because if you're always, you know, you never have your touchdown dance, right? Okay, so that's perfectionism. Personalization. I always give the example of a student. He's a junior at UIC now, and I remember when he was a senior and people would look at him, he would perceive that everyone was thinking how unattractive he was. So he was personalizing an experience that was pretty innocuous. So, you know, I said, well, how do you know when they're looking at you, they're not thinking, oh, I forgot my dry cleaning? You know, like why do you presume that this stranger is focused on you and that it's a negative perception? And this is not uncommon in adolescence. It's actually quite normal. And maybe as parents, you know, eyes are on you all the time. And maybe you can demonstrate to the children that you care about that something really liberating happens when you turn 40. You just don't care what anybody thinks about you. Right? But also, even with children, to say, you know, does it really particularly matter what this person thinks? Are they ever going to see you again? Does this person, you know, care about the things that happen to you? And it's a hard message to sell because that is so critically important with teens. But you know, to kind of always be that model to them that it's really not particularly important what strangers think of you. But the people who care about you, it does matter what they think. All right, right fighting. Well, we all have seen this. It's someone who would rather be right than to think about someone else's feelings or to honor cooperation. It's clearly a distortion. I don't have a solution for that. It's a problem in my own home. Catastrophizing. It's expecting disaster no matter what. And there are some students I work with this issue. And you know, what I like to do then, and I'll go into this in a moment, is I like to make a list of some of the negative or catastrophic statements that they make while they're talking to me, and then to look back at it and say, so, let me think of an example. Okay, so the young lady who applied to 21 schools. So she was talking about how she wants to be a teacher, and she'd like to get into a 5-year master's in teaching program, but some school districts may not hire her because they think that a bachelor's level teacher would be cheaper to employ, and that, you know, this was yesterday when the GOP of the state government came forward with the idea of hijacking CPS. And what if that happens, and I'm not going to be able to get a job, and then privatize what I'm doing, and you know, so I listed all out, and I'm like, you know, you're drawing a lot of conclusions here, most of which you have no control over, and you're always presuming that the worst scenario is going to happen. I said to her one thing that I think I learned when I was 20, and she's like, oh. I said to her, worrying is like paying interest on money you haven't borrowed yet. And she was like, oh. So, I don't think it made a difference, but anyway. So we all are guilty of these cognitive distortions. The key is to become aware of them. When a student comes to me and they're feeling very high anxiety, what I tell them first is, let me be your secretary, I'll be your scribe. And I grab some Post-it notes and I say, everything that's here, that's on your mind, tell it to me and I'll write it down, and then it's not here anymore. So similarly, I'll tell adults and adolescents, children, I'll say, keep a pad of paper near your bed. Because if you wake up and your thoughts are turning, you're not going to be able to resolve it in your head, and plus you're worried that you're going to forget some of it, which is so, you know, seems very important at 3 in the morning. So if you write it down, it's there, and then you can put it to rest. So I'll have a student tell me what all their ills are, and just getting it out there makes it better. You can see that their face seems more relaxed, their tone, their breathing changes, even that practice alone. But then to look at what do you have control over and what do you not have control over. And that's really all you can do. So anyone, give me an example of something that is a source of stress for your child, or for you. Tests, okay. So can you talk about what test, a classroom test or a district test?
The day before she has a math test, she starts to worry about it.
Right.
And doesn't want to go to school.
Okay, all right. So in the case of a test that's coming up, what do you have control over? Your child has control over the amount of sleep she gets, which we know is highly correlated with high achievement and correcting your mood, your alertness, right? And we know that she has control over her ability to focus in class and take notes. She has the ability to use her textbook to review the material. She has the power to talk with her teachers and seek tutoring. She has the power to go on Khan Academy and have Saul Khan explain something way better than you could, right? She has control over her diet to make sure she's eating things that support her nutrition and her brain. And she doesn't have control over things like a fire drill that happens, or the weather outside, or what questions the teacher is going to put on the test. She has no control over the other kids in her class who might be goofing around or cheating or looking at her sheet or whatever. So when you're aware of what you have control over, it gives you a sense of equilibrium. It gives you a sense of control.
How do you dumb that down for an 8-year-old, 7-year-old, 8-year-old?
Oh, we could talk about that during questions. But yeah, I think it's a wonderful question you ask, because these things are, what I'm sharing with you today is really geared towards adolescents and adults, and a level of sophistication and introspection. At the age of 8, there's not a whole lot of introspection, and there you have to kind of manipulate the environment more, where as you emerge and you go through adolescence and adulthood, you realize that there's very little you can do to control your environment, and then you just have to focus on what you yourself personally can control. But I'd be happy to talk to you about that. Okay, so anxiety is created whenever you try to control things you have no control over. So the great example is this horrible combine that the city of Chicago has created related to high school admissions. And I see this again and again and again and again and again. We have students at my 2 select enrollment high schools who never had to try particularly hard in school. They're bright. Testing was never a really big task for them. They come to high school and it's departmentalized, and their parents can't intervene the way that they may have been able to, and their teachers aren't communicating with one another, and they have seven different things from 7 different classes due the same day of the week, and a lot of them hit the wall. And what's so important to remember is that they have less and less control over those sorts of variables, and they need to be more and more control of their own creativity and their ability to self-advocate and solve problems and things like this. And as parents, you probably don't have much control over the lottery process. You don't have much control over the items that are on the select enrollment test. You don't have much control over how your child performs in the 7th grade or in the 8th grade, or the population of students that are applying. But you know, the things you do have control over is assuring your child that everyone belongs somewhere, that that you are safe, you're going to be fine. Wherever you be, you're going to be challenged and looked after. And the variables of how they're going to do on a particular test are things that they don't have control over, so I would encourage parents to discourage that kind of talk, because all it does is it just sort of feeds the fire. Everyone belongs somewhere. I like to say that, and I can say that I've been a school psychologist for 21 years. I know I look incredibly young, so that probably comes as a great surprise to all of you. But I've never encountered a student or a parent tell me, you know, yeah, I went to high school and it didn't work out, it was a disaster, I couldn't get in anywhere, it never worked out. You know, you never quite know the twists and turns that life takes you, and what seems like a horrible thing at the time can turn out to be a really wonderful turn of events. That challenges can be instructional, that as parents our goal isn't to give our children these lollipop lives, it's to give them the strength and the resolve to handle the challenges as well as the wonderful things. So that goes to my next point, that, and I think I spoke to this a moment ago, that to be mentally well means to be integrated. It doesn't mean to be happy all the time. It means that the person I am when I'm talking to Ms. Karana, when I'm with my children, when I'm talking to any of you, or when I'm at work, I'm basically the same person. I'm integrated. If you are a different person with different people because you're being dishonest, let's say, and you have to kind of compartmentalize or be a different person in different environments, that's not mental health. That's the opposite of integration. It's disintegration. So to be clear in your mind that our goal, again, isn't for everyone to be happy and joyful. It's that, you know, when we're having a moment where we're really compromised, that we have the resolve, we have the self-esteem, the self-efficacy, the security to know that we're going to be okay, and that we're going to be better people for knowing that we can make it through these challenges. And I love this expression, you're as sick as your secrets. So if you can go through this world, and that's why I really impress honesty on my own children and the kids that I work with at my high schools. If you can look someone in the eye and not holding back anything that you should tell them, there are no lies of omission or commission, there's really nothing healthier. I think it was Mark Twain who said that if you're telling the truth, you don't have to remember anything. And that's very liberating, and it's so much less brain power that has to be used, like, I think I told this one this, and I hope these people don't talk about that. And, you know, it's very complicating, and it can be very distorting. So the kind of psychology theory that a lot of school-based clinicians practice is called cognitive behavior therapy. It's understanding the connection between our thoughts, our feelings, and our behaviors. There's a really strong connection between these three variables, and it's a really helpful way to think about our own mental health. So there are two examples I like to give. The first is, like, let's say it's a Monday morning and you have to go to work or go to school, and it's, you know, gloomy out, and, you know, you just want to stay in bed. All right, so what are you probably going to be thinking? Like, I want to stay home, right? And you're feeling kind of like, ugh, right? I don't know what that means, but you know what I'm talking about. And your physicality is going to be like, right? So that's a system that you've created that's in place, and they feed each other, right? So then you get to school, and you're walking down the hallway, and you're like this, right? So are your friends going to want to, like, come up to you and be like, hey, I want a part of that? They probably don't. And then you're thinking, great, so now I'm a social pariah. No one likes me. That's what you're thinking. You're feeling isolated and sad, right? So it's a cycle that feeds itself. Or we could take it a different direction. You can always affect your thoughts and your behaviors. It's hard to affect your feelings, but there's a study that came out in 1992 that suggests that just the action of smiling, not a fake smile, but like a real smile. Can I see some real smiles? Real ones? Okay. So what's happening is that your brain is releasing endorphins, happy chemicals, just by doing this to your body, just doing this to your face. And then it's feeding your feelings and your thoughts, and it's moving the cycle in a different direction. I like to give the example of preschool. When you were a preschooler, you didn't know what kind of day you were going to have until it was snack time. So if it was graham crackers, it was going to be a really good day, right? And then if it was saltines, not going to be a good day, right? But these are variables outside of yourself. But another way to look at it now that we're older is I can decide what kind of day I'm going to have. And it doesn't really particularly matter whether they're saltines that are offered to me or graham crackers. I'm going to have a good day. And these are the things I do that make me feel good, that restore me. So I'm going to do those things. I'm going to have a good day. And that is a sign of maturity that you see amongst adolescents. When they stop chasing the drama, or they stub their toes, so the whole day is going to be a disaster, or they tripped in front of someone and they look foolish. You know what? You decide what kind of day you're going to have. And the sooner that an individual can learn that, the happier they'll be, because it's this wonderful, again, getting back to the control. What do you have control over? You have control over what kind of day you're going to have. So again, repeating the theme of thoughts, feelings, and behaviors, here are some more strategies that you can use. We're almost done, just so you know. From the thought side, you can minimize your stress by cutting down on non-essentials. What are the things that your teen is doing that they really don't need to do? The things that don't feed them. By feed them, I don't mean nutritionally, I mean spiritually, emotionally. What are they doing just because they're supposed to do it, not because they want to do it? You know, and you get some of this like, oh, but I really love photography, but I also love horseback riding. And math team is critical. I can't get into college if I don't do math team. Well, here's the thing, you know, you can do math team when you're 46. You can ride horses when you're 25. You know, like, why do you always have to jam it into a school year, right? Or a particular period of time? You know, to kind of dispel some of these myths that exist about, oh, I have to do these things, otherwise I won't be liked. Well, you know, so there are 1,000 colleges in the United States or whatever, and you know, if you apply to 20 and you're accepted by the 20th, you're still going to go to a pretty good school, right? It's still going to be a good match for you. There's still a future for you. I think that people's views of what's acceptable becomes very narrow, and instead of wanting the best, ask yourself, well, what's the best for me? What's the best for my family? So what is your standard? Here's a really good one. What's the worst that could happen? So in the example of your child who's afraid of a test, what's the worst that could happen? What is the worst that could happen? Can you get below a 0? No. And even if you did, you know, maybe they can do test corrections. Chances are they won't get a 0, right? Chances are they could learn from those mistakes and be better for it. Maybe that's kind of a sunshiny interpretation of it, but you know, that kind of at least puts it into context that, you know, heaven and earth won't be colliding and the ground won't be cracking below your feet. Challenge distorted thinking and those negative core beliefs. So just to become more aware of them when you say them, and certainly when your child says them. Feelings. So that's the good stuff. I always have students make a list for me of like the 10 things that just fill up their gas tank, the 10 things that just make them feel like human beings. And, you know, I can be personal here. I enjoy baths. I enjoy low-quality reality television. I do. And I'm past a place where I should feel ashamed of it. I enjoy it, and it just makes me feel relaxed. Seeing other people's problems are my own. So, you know, if you can make a list of 10 of them, and I always say to students, if you're feeling compromised, if you're feeling stressed, why don't you do, like, make sure you do 5 of those 10. You know, we're so eager in our schools to amp up the rigor, but I truly believe that in equal measure we need to provide restorative practices. So just make sure that you have time to do the things that make your heart happy, as well as the things that are aspirational. Behaviors. Exercise, diet, sleep. Can we please talk about sleep? I could put you to sleep talking about sleep. Do you know that kids should have 8.5 hours a night? Okay. Do you know that there may be 4 kids at the high schools where I work that get 8.5 hours of sleep a night, right? And I just can go on and on about the importance of it. It's the only time our body grows. It's the only time we heal from injury or build up our immunity to illness. It's the only time we properly digest our food. It regulates our mood. And it's also when we learn. Do you know that our brains don't shut down like those, images of like Z's coming out of our head? Our brain never shuts down. In fact, when we're sleeping, what we're doing is we're sifting through everything that we've learned during the day. And this woman here, her gray cable sweater, 2 days from now, you're not going to remember that because it's not important. But whatever happened today that you did, let's say twice, or if you did something that was emotionally evocative, something that made you laugh really hard or cry really hard or whatever, those are the things that you hold on to. And that's actually an argument for homework. So if you learn something at 10 a.m. and then you review it at 4:30, it happened twice in a 24-hour cycle, so your brain is more likely to remember it. Now, does that mean that you need to do 2 hours of something mind-numbing? No. It can also just be 6 minutes of reviewing your notes. But I always say to students, if you want your brain to work in your best interest, do something twice in one day. Even if you don't have homework, just take a few minutes to review it, because then your brain will remember the content more likely than if you just left the notebook closed at night. Oh, goodbye. No, we're almost, hello. In your homes, create predictable, supportive peer and family relationships. Parents say to me, like, what can I do? My child is stressed, my child is anxious. And I say, all you can do, and really your only job, is to create a soft place for your child to land. Just create a loving, predictable home. Leave the education and the punitive stuff to the forces out there that cause punitive and educational things to happen. It's not your job to coach them through school, because very often what happens is it gets emotional very quickly. When I work with a student and I talk to them about setting up a binder system or something for their notebooks, I don't get a lot of pushback because there's no emotional baggage between me and these students. It's just, let's roll up our sleeves and figure this out. But if their parent tried to say the exact same thing, forget about it, right? Then it becomes a power struggle. So even if you have the best idea as to how to organize your child, don't let it come out of your mouth. Talk to Ms. Karana and have her express that to your child. And have it be her idea. Who cares? As long as they're organized, does it really matter, right? So yeah, just be supportive. And also, I'll see this at my 2 high schools too. Parents come in and they're so anxious because their child's grades are dropping, and they don't quite know why. They know their child isn't really studying the way that he or she should, and it's a high school, so you can't really go inside the doors, and you can't look at your kids' locker and their notebooks, and there's 7 teachers, and what's happening to these parents is they're trying to control something that they have no control over. So get back to what you do have control over. Right? You have control over the predictable home that you create for your family. You have control over how you model achievement and how you strive in your own life to achieve things. You have control over perhaps communicating with the teachers. Freshman and sophomore year, it's okay, but junior and senior year, it's completely developmentally inappropriate to be communicating with your kids' teachers. And that sort of thing. But again, not to be afraid of them messing up, screwing up, because again, that's the good stuff. Okay. And then meditation and relaxation techniques. We can actually practice one right now if you like. Do you want to do that? Okay. Well, I said it like that, so everyone goes, okay. This is actually a really easy one. So if a student comes to me and let's say their happy place on the scale is between a 4 and 6 and they're an 8, I'll say, okay, let's practice this. I'll ask them to close their eyes and to just practice, and you guys can do this if you want to. Breathe in through your nose and out through your mouth. Breathe in and out. And as you're breathing in, try to visualize breathing in life-giving oxygen that feeds all the organs of your body, that feeds your brain. See that oxygen-rich blood pumping through your veins, your capillaries, your arteries. So just light and life as you inhale. And each time you exhale, imagine exhaling all the dark places, the self-doubt, the things that are holding you back, the distorted thoughts. So breathe in the light, push out the dark. Let's do 5 of these. Breathe in, breathe out. Breathe in the light, push out the dark. Breathe in and out. About now, imagine that all of your insides are just clear and light. All the darkness is escaping your body. One more, breathe in and out. Now when you're ready, open your eyes. I hope what you're noticing is that the light's a little sharper, right? And the sound is a little sharper and brighter, right? So what we've all done is just change a channel in your brain a little bit, change your alertness. Maybe instead of being an 8, you're closer to a 7 or a 6. And that's something you have for the rest of your life. And if you don't like what I just taught you, you can go on YouTube and there are like 67,000 other examples of that. You can choose one that you like. One last thing. I always impress upon students that there is many ways to learn as there are human beings on this planet. And the model that you're supposed to go home from school and just sit down and like work away until you're done and then, go and bathe and go to sleep and do it all again the next day. It's not really normal or human. If you need to take a break for 15 minutes every hour, or if you need to take a 5-minute break every 10 minutes, whatever, as long as it gets done. Just kind of normalize that any way that your student figures it out, as long as it's getting the job done, it's okay. Because I think for a lot of children, a lot of teens, they feel that what they're going through is unique and odd, and they're irregular and different. And anything you could do to normalize their experiences, share anecdotes from your own upbringing, could go a really long way. Their eyes are on you, and they're much more interested in the way that you live your life and the way you make your decisions than anything that you could ever possibly say. Okay. So, that's it. Thank you.
Yeah, I think we can open up the floor to questions for Dr. Gilson or myself too. I can answer anything that you have questions about. The only thing I would say is for the recording, if we could repeat the questions so that it's heard.
Okay.
But yeah, go open up the floor.
The earlier question, how do you relate this to my 8-year-old son?
Right. So with children, younger children, you have to do a lot more to affect their environment, and it's less than you could possibly do through them. It's important to be, in the messages you're giving your child, it's important to be multimodal, so to give them visual examples, auditory examples, examples from their life, bibliotherapy, which is examples from books, to kind of give them some ideas as to how to manage things like stress related to tests. I'm sure there are books out there, or anecdotes, or drawings out there, or things that kind of visualize the experience of feeling stress around tests. But also I think it's important to communicate with your child's teachers, because at that age, there's not a whole lot that your child can do. They simply don't have the vocabulary to self-advocate. But another thing you can do too is to model a way to properly prepare for tests. And I know, like here at Bell, as early as 4th grade in the curriculum, they teach different ways of studying for tests. An 8-year-old I know is a little bit younger than that. But you learn best if you're getting proper sleep, right? You also learn best if you not cram the night before, but if you give yourself a few days of preparation. Also maybe to kind of see, Johnny, there are a lot of different ways to study. Let's find the way that you learn best. So it could be a flashcard approach. It could be, covering the answers and then opening it. It could be quizzing them. Some people learn best by copying the information down, or creating a cheat sheet, or going to different online resources. So I think your child's teacher might have some insight as to how they learn best. But if they have come from this generalized place of, I can't test, I'm horrible at it, if you actually, at a time when they're calm and centered and able to hear your message, and you could look at a prior test with them, there's always something redeeming. There's always an example that challenges their thinking that they're horrible at tests. They always had to have done well on something. Or even if it wasn't a classroom test, it could have been a swimming test or anything. Like my son the other day was telling me that he's not very good at anything. And so I gave him some examples of his life where he did things pretty well. Even at the wise age of 10, he needed to be reminded that there are things that he can do. And it's easy to forget because we're so hard on ourselves. We're our own worst critics. I hope that's helpful.
Yeah, I have a 16-year-old and an 8-year-old, so this is perfect right on for my 16-year-old. But and what you just said about the 8-year-old, she also is saying that she's everybody else knows how to do it, but she doesn't.
Right,
Like
and that's a distortion.
Like I'm the only one who doesn't get it in the class, or I'm
Right.
the dumbest one in the class.
Right, and you can see how that would feed her anxiety. Because
So what do you
if
say
I'm the
to-
dumbest, what do I do with that?
So what's the first thing that you should say when they say that to you?
That's a great question. I can think of a few
Because I
different
just say, no,
things.
you're not,
Right.
That's the thing that pops in my head. Of course you're
Right,
not.
and then it would be, well, how do you know you're not in my class with me, right? Right,
Yeah.
so, I'm thinking of a few different things. Number one, maybe for that child to sit with their teacher. And, just to express that there are things you do exceptionally well in this classroom. Everyone has peaks and valleys. Everyone has strengths and weaknesses, every one of us. I could evaluate every single one of you, and I'd find things that you do terribly and things that you do really well. So I think, to talk with the teacher, to meet with your child, to really test the veracity of that kind of a statement, because it's simply not true. And then if it's not true, well, what is the truth? Oh, well, maybe the truth is that I have to work for some things, that things don't just get handed to me. And that's hard for some kids to realize. It's hard for adults to realize that some things don't just come easily to me, that sometimes things have to be earned through hard work. And then that's a sweet reward. And I'm sure you can draw some examples from your 8-year-old's life where she had to work particularly hard for something, and things that came very easy to her as well. I mean, just today I evaluated a 10th grader with severe dyslexia. And she has to struggle and study so much harder than anyone else that I've ever seen to get the grades that she does, to just understand what's going on in her classrooms. But she could be all woe is me, but she chooses not to. To focus on her strengths, what might be a good career match for her. She'll probably never functionally read above a 5th grade level, but we live in a society that can create accommodations for her to make sure her civil rights aren't being violated. And luckily she lives in a family where her strengths are emphasized and her challenges are just dealt with, And maybe give her some examples, especially in a school like Bell, where we have some students with some extraordinary disabilities that are handling it. Volunteerism is another great example. It can be very humbling to be around people your age who are dealing with far more extraordinary challenges than you are. There's just a few things off the top of my head. Anything else? Yes?
How do you help out a student who, gets stressed or upset in the classroom, if they get a bad grade or forget an assignment, and they kind of work themselves up so that that's just a very distressing event? It happens at school, you're not there.
Right.
What kind of tools do you give your child to kind of de-escalate?
Right. Well, I guess it's hard to know what works unless you've already been there and done it. So maybe as your child's reflecting what had happened, you can say, well, what brought it down? What helped you when you were feeling, really breathy or nervous or anxious? Oh, it just took time. Or, Mom, I tried that really cool breathing technique you taught me the other day. Or for some people it's drawing or listening to music. I know yesterday there's a student who had been been psychiatrically hospitalized over winter break. And when she's feeling overwhelmed, she has an accommodation where she can just leave her class and purposefully come to my office or the counselor's office or the attendant's office. And she just needed like 10 minutes, and she collected herself and left and went back to class. So you can create a protocol with your child and your child's teacher. It doesn't have to be anything that extraordinary. But it's also a really wonderful opportunity for your child to be like, you know, this works. I know that I can do this. Even if I feel panicky, someone told me once it can't last longer than 20 minutes, right? And that it, you know, it's very human and normal to be this way sometimes. It's not bad, it's not something to be shunned. And when you have this physiological response, you deal with it and you journey on.
Just to piggyback off that, I also like to talk to students a lot about their self-talk. Okay, when you're feeling that way, what are some positive messages you can tell yourself to kind of talk you down from that experience? I know that's built in a lot to our second step curriculum, is that idea of self-talk, and how to, you know, what are some things, like go-tos that you can remember to repeat to yourself when you're in that state.
And that narrative, like, I can't test well, or I'm just not good, if that's their self-talk, that colors every aspect of their life. So if you can make them aware that that's not accurate, and instead replace it with, I've got some challenges, and I've got to learn how to deal with them, or I worked things out before, I'll work this thing out too. You know, to change the language, because again, vocabulary is so predictive, language is so predictive of our state of mind.
Well, thank you all so much for coming tonight. Please do spread the word. This will be available, this recording will be available on our webpage within the next week or so. And if you have any further questions, feel free to follow up with me. My information is, or Dr. Gilson. My email address is available on the website. My phone number is available on the website. So if you have any questions related to your child specifically, please do feel free to reach out. And then as a follow-up, we will be talking about things that Bell is doing proactively, some programs that we've rolled out, specifically responsive classroom, second step, and the behavioral health team. We'll kind of dive deeper into what those look like on February 11th. We'll do that kind of in conjunction with the parent forum, and then it'll go straight into the LSC meeting. So we hope to see many of you there, and please spread the word. We'll start at 6. 6. 6 o'clock.
To be presented to the next 7th and 8th graders, or
This presentation,
with Jackie?
we could talk about it. Yeah. We'd love to have you back. Yeah.
Will the presentation be available online as well? Or
Yes.
just,
No, we'll put the presentation as well. Awesome. Thanks, guys. I am. Counselor.